Yeah, I was born in Gallup, New Mexico, which is a border town to the Navajo reservation, just on the north side of it. The Navajo reservation almost practically surrounds Gallup, New Mexico. Most of New Mexico is federal land, and Gallup, New Mexico is where is town. It's town for people for about at least 45 miles in radius. That's where town is. That's where you go grocery shopping. That's where you, if you're a silversmith, that's where you sell your jewelry. If you teach, you may be able to teach on a public school in the reservation, but most of my friends, they went into town and taught there. It was a long way from things. And I didn't really realize that. I thought 35 miles is pretty normal for people to get to town, until I moved to Utah and told my kids, get in the car, we're going to town. And they're like, we are in town. It's kind of fun. We didn't really have a lot of livestock growing up. I think at most we had about 12 sheep, and we didn't really raise them for anything more than to give them away. A lot of times when you have ceremonies, where I grew up, if you go to a ceremony where someone's having a ceremony done for them, they usually have a place where you eat. And so we would donate our sheep to families that were having ceremonies so that they could help feed people that came to support the patient in those ceremonies. That's what we used our sheep for. And we always had horses. We didn't seem to have enough of them, it seemed like. We would always end up... not a lot of people bought alfalfa for their horses. A lot of people just let them go and let them graze, and then when you needed them, you went and had to go find them. And my dad, at least for our sake, because as kids we were the ones that had to go find our horses, he would at least hobble one of them, right? He put, so they just didn't take off 20 miles in the middle of nowhere. They were about 5 miles out, and you're a little kid walking with a rope trying to find your horse in the open, right? Trying to figure out what direction they went. But we'd have those, and we'd ride them a lot of places, and it was good times for us. And in the Navajo tribe, it's just one of 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. Okay, and there's about 200 that are probably just state recognized, probably another 100 that don't have any recognition at all. And that to explain a little bit about what that means is being Indian just isn't a racial status. Okay, we are indeed ethnic minorities in the United States, but Indian is actually a legal status because we are citizens of federally recognized sovereign nations, and we're citizens of these tribes. And so that's something that's a little different. A federal government and a state government recognizing a tribal government as sovereign, as a group that can make its own laws and be ruled by them, as a group that can make decisions on its land, its water usage, and within reason and limitations by federal law. But those exist. And I remember being a part of a panel that was speaking about federalism, and I was going a little last in the lineup, and every presenter before me never mentioned tribes in the discussion of federalism. Federalism seems to be a discussion between the state government and the federal government, but when so many federal lands today, at one point, were the traditional lands, and for a lot of tribes hold sacred sites for these tribes, sacred areas. These tribes are their voice and their comments are not really being heard or being sought, and I think that's something that really needs to change. When we're talking about federal land usage, federal land care, tribes definitely have a stake in this conversation because we lived there, right? In a lot of cases, we still use that land for what we used it for a long time ago. And you'll see that, especially in cases like Bears Ears. It's federal land, right? It's not state land. It's not tribal land. It's federal land. No matter who expands it or shrinks it, it stays federal land. But the tribes really want their voices heard in those things. Calling it a land grab is probably a little disingenuous. I guess land grab in the sense of you're deciding how that land is being used. You could make that argument, but for the most part, it becomes an argument between the federal government and the state government, and not a lot of emphasis placed on tribal governments and their needs and their uses of that land. Some tribes, we're like I said, there's 574 tribes, reservations all across the U.S. Some of them really small, some of them really big. We just happen to be on the largest reservation in the United States, the Navajo Nation, and Utah itself has the second largest reservation in the United States in it. So the Ute tribes go east of here a couple of hours. Some tribes really rely on livestock. They're involved in the cattle industry, even if that industry is limited to local towns or even to buyers from their own tribe. We have a lot of Navajo Nation issues grazing permits to its members, and they allow a certain amount of cow units or sheep units that you can use within a given area. So there is land management that goes on there. But on top of all these domestic animals, we also have on the Navajo reservation 60,000 wild horses, which is a lot, more than I imagined. I remember waking up on Saturday mornings, right, and opening the back door and seeing horses, but they're at most 15, 20, maybe 25 a herd of horses, or wild horses. I didn't realize that there were so many herds of horses all over, because I only saw like 2 main herds trying to kick down my corral and steal our mares, but we were throwing rocks at our corral, trying to get them away. But we have that. We still have a lot of sheep, not as much as we used to, but we still have a lot. Those same Saturday mornings, if you don't see wild horses, you probably see someone's sheep in your backyard with their goats climbing all over your vehicles, putting little tiny dents in them that you can't knock out, right? And my parents being really upset about that. And then you have some tribes like the Goshutes, just west of here, Skull Valley and Confederate tribes. They didn't welcome the introduction to the horse even. They moved on foot. Can you imagine living out? I don't know if anybody's been towards Windover, but go an hour south of Windover. There's a place an hour south of Windover, in case you didn't know, and it's called Ibopaw, Utah, where the Confederate tribes of the Goshute live. They were on foot. I think they prided themselves as people that moved around on foot. They thought the horse did too much destruction to the land that they were on. It competed with them for vegetation, disrupted the food cycles of the other animals that relied on that vegetation. So they pushed that stuff out. Right? They relied only on what antelope and elk and deer that came across. Otherwise, they were a rabbit and insect and plant people. But they moved around on foot a lot. I was thinking about the comment that was made about wildlife not having rights, and it's scary. You think about that, and it really does put the emphasis on us to make sure that we help and understand that there is a right. Maybe that wolf deserves life and food just as much as domestic cattle. Maybe the mice deserve just as much greenery and nuts as the cattle that eat on that too, But in the end, we're going to have to try to find that balance, restoring it to what we've changed America. There's towns that exist that never existed before. There's roads that exist that never existed before. We've changed waterways. We've changed water pathways. We're going to have to step back and really figure out what's the best way to do this now. Even Navajo Nation as a tribe has to figure out how to manage its wildlife in a way that not only stops it from blowing into California, increasing their shoreline, but also in a way that protects the things that we have spiritually. A lot of these areas where we live, we didn't dedicate these areas as sacred. We didn't dedicate a mountain as sacred. We didn't dedicate certain canyons as sacred or certain waterways are sacred. Those places are sacred to Navajo people by experience. We've just recognized their sacredness. We didn't say from now on this place is sacred. We've always known it was sacred through experience. And you'll find that throughout the United States. Like the Black Hills, for thousands of years, tribes have recognized the power and energy from the area, so much so that they fought over it. Not because someone dedicated that area as sacred, but because it is. And we have to be able to recognize that. I was just reading that in the Northwest, the Yurok tribe just wrote a resolution that declared that the Klamath River has sacred rights. In fact, that the Klamath River has rights of personhood. The tribal government recognizes the river as living and deserving of our protection and our accountability. And so we need to be able to think like that a little bit more. You know, the market can't always be the baseline for the decisions we make. We also need to look at living things around us. And I'll yield there. Thank you.